Okay, welcome everyone to the admissions webinar. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Miller. I am the Director of Admissions here at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. I am joined by my alumni, Allie Tripp, who's going to be sharing her story with us this evening. And we look forward to learning more about her experiences, her journey, and what are some of the secrets about Seattle that she learned during her time here? Our land acknowledgement. So the University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The Evans School acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. And with that, I am going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to ask Allie, can you please introduce yourself, the year you graduated, and kind of what are you doing now?
Yeah, folks. My name's Allie. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated from the Evans School in 2015. So this spring it'll be 9 years ago, which sends me into a little bit of a tailspin if I think about that too hard. And I actually have been with the same nonprofit in Seattle since I graduated from the Evans School. It's an organization called Washington Trails Association. And once you move to Washington, I promise you will become familiar with WTA as we are more widely known. It's the largest state-based organization in the country dedicated to issues that face hikers in public lands, from educating people how to get outside safely, giving them the information they need to do so, and some great, volunteer work, advocacy work. And I'm a senior project manager there. So I do a lot with our strategic plan. But I still think a lot about the things I learned at the Evans School, and am definitely excited to talk to you all about that transition, because so I moved to Seattle to attend Evans. And I celebrated my 10-year anniversary in Seattle last year, and actually published a book about Seattle in that exact time, not intentionally for my anniversary, but it just happened to work out that way. So I'm excited to share some things with you all this evening.
Awesome. And so you talked about your beginning with your experience. Why did you choose Evans? Was Evans your only choice?
So I was born and raised in various cities along the eastern seaboard, northeastern seaboard, and had a couple of experiences, went to undergrad in Boston, and had a couple of experiences through internships and the like, firmly deciding that I was not interested in entering the federal government for employment. So when I was looking, but I knew I was really interested in MPA or MPP program, but a lot of the East Coast schools in particular tended to have a sort of focus more on government employment following your education. And so I was super interested in programs that had a stronger nonprofit management track. And as someone who moved around, not a ton, but a little bit as a kid, I was ready to try a different coast. So I was looking at West Coast schools that had nonprofit management focuses. So Evans ended up being my first choice, but not until I visited Seattle for I used visiting the school as an excuse for why I was going, but in actuality, I was visiting a friend and going to a concert and really excited about visiting Seattle. And I tacked on the Evans School as yeah, I should look there. And then I remember walking into Parrington to get admissions info and being like, wow, this campus. My undergrad was a really beautiful campus too. And so I never thought I would get that again in graduate school. It just wasn't a factor that I thought about. But I remember driving through UW for the first time and just being in real awe of how beautiful it is too.
So what made you make that jump to Washington State from the East Coast? Because it's very different.
Yes. I mean, I was looking at it as a sort of temporary adventure, to be honest. So it felt like an easier decision to make because at the time I didn't think it would be permanent. I thought I would likely return to Boston, where I had been living, or somewhere on the East Coast. Most of my family was there at the time, my friends. I did convince my boyfriend at the time, now husband, to move out here with me. And we both thought it was temporary. His family really thought it was temporary. So when we decided to stay, there were a few people who were not thrilled about it. Um, but yeah, I think I was just excited. In the end, the decision was based on the Evans School and that it was, the best program that I got into. And I was really compelled by, the academic offerings. And I was also excited about Seattle as a city. I did have one really good friend from undergrad who lived out here. So it didn't feel like we were moving, without knowing anyone. I was like, oh, well, I'm sure I'll meet people at school. But then we also have this one friend, to latch onto a little bit socially from the beginning. But I was just excited to be somewhere new. There were some similarities I could draw between Seattle and Boston in terms of like how the neighborhoods are really distinctive, in that like when you think about where to live, you might like have different things that are important to you. And so you would choose a different neighborhood based on that set of criteria. I was also excited about no snow, I will say. I was interested in a snow-free lifestyle.
And so you mentioned that your boyfriend, now husband, decided to take that journey with you. Did you have a moving to Washington strategy? Like, what were you thinking about when you made that decision?
Yeah, we definitely, well, I put as much thinking into the move once we got here as I did into the cross country road trip that I planned, which I was very proud of and was very enjoyable, and would recommend if you're moving from somewhere else in the States to drive it, just because it's a fun excuse to see other parts of the country you might not anyway. But my advice for is a little bit different than what my experience was. In the end, the rental market was just so different than what I knew in Boston. Boston is dominated by universities. So you rent a place 9 months ahead of when you need it, and all leases begin on September 1st, or for the most part. So like finding housing can be really challenging in Boston if you're not doing it way ahead of time. Whereas in Seattle, finding housing ahead of time is actually more challenging than finding it like once you arrive or within 6 weeks of your arrival. So I think like, yeah, if I could have, what I would have loved to have done is like come out 6 weeks before, I was moving here to find a spot, but we ended up renting an apartment in Belltown, which is just north of the like downtown core, in the heart of the city. Really easy bus access to UW, I will say. And now there's the light rail. Like when I moved here, the light rail didn't go to UW. So talk about making a lot of the city more accessible to the university. That's a big difference from when I moved. But I think just doing some research around like the neighborhoods, think about like what kind of life you like to lead outside of your academia, because while you will surely be studying hard, you will also be doing other things. So what kind of nightlife do you like? What kind of recreation opportunities are you interested in? How quiet do you like your surrounding neighborhood to be? Like if you like it quiet, don't move to Capitol Hill. If you don't like it quiet, move to Capitol Hill. But yeah, I would say my strategy was not as well thought out, although living in Belltown ended up being great exposure to a lot of the tourist activities in downtown Seattle at the time. I had a lot of visitors come in the first year, and it was really easy to just like walk around with them and where I lived, rather than always having to get on a bus to go somewhere. But I confess I did move out of Belltown after a year because I was like, okay, now I know what I like and what I need. So that's another strategy too, is like finding a temporary solution for a little while until you get to know it a little bit better and what suits your lifestyle the best.
I like that you said there was a temporary until you got to know Washington or different parts of Seattle that you could see yourself living in. And so don't feel like, oh, I have to go and commit to a 2-year
Yeah.
rental agreement. It's really flexible, whether you're renting for 6 months or a year. You definitely have opportunities to move around once you get to know the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so once you got settled into your new home, how did you get to explore Seattle?
Yeah. I mean, I think I got kind of lucky or just quickly you meet people in class and you quickly find people that you might share a common interest or two, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for socialization outside of class or through various interest groups and the like. And so a lot of my exposure in that first year to neighborhoods like outside of the university district or where I lived were through people at school who lived in that neighborhood and like wanted people to see it, and it would invite folks to a restaurant that they liked or something. I had friends at the time who were like a little bit more intentional about how they explored, and they were like, once a month I go to a different neighborhood and like check out the farmers market, check out a restaurant and a coffee shop and a bar. And I wouldn't say my approach was that strategic then, but it definitely was in writing my book. So since then, I've become a little more academic about my exploration of Seattle. But there's really there's something for everyone, I think, and there's like even more when you consider the surrounding areas. If you at all enjoy outdoor activities, you're going to find both interest groups to join and ample opportunities to get outside the city and do things, and even in the city. We did a lot of like kayaking on Lake Union and while I was in grad school, which you can do right out of Agua Verde, like practically on the UW campus. You can rent canoes directly from UW to explore the same area. I like a kayak; it's a little more stable than a canoe personally. But yeah, I think it depending on what your interest is there, it's a big enough city that there's sort of something for everyone, I think.
So let's talk about some of those hidden gems or secrets
Yeah.
that you found. I'm curious.
Yeah. So the book is called The Hidden Secrets of Seattle. Oh, thanks. And it's actually a really interesting series, published by a Belgian publisher. So they have, like 50 plus titles for cities around the world. I was introduced to it while I was visiting a dear friend in Munich, who was an expat and was using it as she just moved to Munich from another city in Germany, and she was using this book as a way to get to know the city. So certainly feel free to use my book as a way to get to know Seattle if you move here. But not everything in the book is a secret. Like I think my first draft, I proposed something that didn't include like lists. So it's 500 places around the city, and some outside of the city as well, based on chapters. So like eating, drinking, outdoor adventures, places to stay, shopping, and the like. And I didn't include any mention of Pike Place in my first draft. And the publisher was like, you got to talk about Pike Place. And I was like, it's not a secret. It's like the one thing people know about this city. And they were like, okay, we need you to come up with some kind of approach where like, what are the, besides just walking around Pike Place, like what are the things you can do? So there's a list, 5 things to do at Pike Place Market in the book, if you want to check that out. But yeah, I think like my encouragement for people visiting Seattle or moving to Seattle is to try to just like vary your experiences and seek out like good views. I think that's one thing that Seattle has. I've been lucky enough to do a fair amount of traveling, and just between the skyline, which is lovely, but like not like the most lovely you've ever seen, but it's nice. The Space Needle stands out. The Space Needle at Smith Tower kind of bookend the skyline when you're looking at it from the east or west. But then you have mountains on actually like every side. To the southwest, you've got Mount Rainier just looming, which UW takes real beautiful advantage of from a couple of vistas. And then, you have the Olympic Mountains, and in between Seattle and the Olympic Mountains, you have the stunning Puget Sound. And occasionally there are orcas swimming in it that you can see. I've actually seen orcas from the land in Seattle in the water in front of me. Like, it's pretty special when it comes to just like natural beauty. So definitely encourage people, like when you're visiting or when you get here, to seek out some great viewpoints. And then pick your fancies. What kind of food do you like? What kind of, are you interested in history? We have some cool history museums. Are you interested in, bar hopping? We have a lot of great breweries and bars and all that good stuff too. So it abounds, really. And I'm happy, if people want recommendations for very specific things, I'm happy to make them, but I'll keep it general for now.
So I know, unlike the East Coast that has seasons, what were some of the quarters, I guess, in Washington that you said, wow, this is a really great opportunity to explore? And what were some of the things you explored during that time?
Yeah. Well, the first year that I lived in Seattle, we had an unseasonably warm winter. And I remember, like, that was my sort of biggest fear moving to Seattle, was like the dark and the rain, and just like people talk about it like it's such an intimidating thing. And that's not to say that it's not. Like, it does get dark, and there are winters that have felt kind of oppressive, where you're like, it's been gray for 49 days. Like, where's the sun? What's happening? But the first winter I experienced here was actually like an extraordinarily easy one. And we had like a streak of like 60-degree days in February. And I actually remember meeting up with my sister in like early March, and we both freckle a lot in the sun, and I had more freckles than her, and she was living in Florida at the time. And we were like, oh, this is interesting. She was probably wearing more sun protection than I was, so like that's probably why. But we were laughing that like that could happen to me in Seattle in the winter. I think the fall actually is lovely. So when you arrive, like the first 2 months, September and October, I would advise arriving early if folks can, because Seattle summer is like not a secret. It's wonderful. It's really beautiful. It's lovely. When there's no smoke, there is wildfire smoke, unfortunately. That does occasionally dampen the glory, but for the most part, like you just get these streaks of like 75-degree sunny days and like kind of no chance of rain. Like, I grew up with thunderstorms, which occasionally I miss, but like when it comes to like planning an activity outdoors, you're like guaranteed for it to be nice out from like, the joke is it starts July 5th and then goes to about like September 15th or so, I would say. But even the fall is really lovely. There's a lot of great things to be said about like the milder days in September and October as well. And then, in that November, December timeframe, you start to transition and it starts to get a little bit darker. I personally don't find that time of year too difficult, because people are like putting up holiday lights and you're sort of fine. It's the transition to January that gets hard, and I think most people have a hard time with. I know I shouldn't be advocating leaving Seattle, but a tip for success that I was told by someone who grew up here was like, if you're not leaving to see the sun in January or February, at some point, like, you're making a mistake. Like, you've done winter wrong here. Like, but if you're a winter sports person, there's plenty to do and enjoy within really close proximity to the city. So I think, like, I have a lot of colleagues at my outdoorsy nonprofit job who, just spend all winter skiing or snowshoeing or cross-country skiing or something, and there's more snow up. I mean, there's more sun even up in the mountains sometimes than there is down here. There are also corners of Washington. We think of like the Olympic Peninsula out here, which is, probably a 3-hour. I mean, you can drive a lot farther than that and still be on the Olympic Peninsula, but like, to get over there, it's about 3 hours from Seattle. And maybe you're familiar with like Forks from Twilight or something like that, the rainiest place in the lower 48. But there are also corners of the Olympic Peninsula, like the city of Sequim, that receive like more sunshine than Seattle, or like some parts of the east side of the state. So like there's certainly places to go to enjoy yourself, and plenty of things to do. I think that the best thing is like to get a good raincoat, and admit that like a little drizzle shouldn't stop you from doing something outside, because usually that's what it is. It's like a light drizzle. It's not like a hard rain that like you need an umbrella and like rain boots for, kind of thing. So there's a hardiness that I think you eventually adapt. There's also a lack of cold hardiness. Like I was used to commuting in Boston at like 15 degrees in like a business skirt and tights and like winter boots, but still like part of your leg exposed. And now I wear like a huge winter puffy jacket when it's like 40 degrees outside. And I think about what my previous self would say to that. But then spring also arrives here really early. We just had the big peak bloom of the cherry blossoms, and UW has a famous collection of them that hopefully you've seen photos of. And they're amazing, but they're also just cherry blossoms all over the city. I have a particular route around my neighborhood that I walk to visit my favorite trees several times each year when they're blooming. So we actually have a lot of family who come to visit us from the East Coast this time of year, and they're always like, oh, it's so green here. Everything's blooming. Like the weather might not have turned super nice, but everything's really alive, which feels very different from like the Northeast, where things are still like, nothing's blooming yet. It's all still kind of in its dormancy winter phase. And then, of course, the second you finish with school, maybe do an internship that summer and have less free time in the middle of the day is like right when it's its nicest. So, but definitely, summer here is really, in my opinion, like unparalleled. I don't know if you would agree, Dr. Miller, but.
Absolutely. I enjoy the summer. I enjoy hiking. I tried Rattlesnake Ridge
Nice.
recently, which was fun. It was collie. I thought the time that I got to the top, I was going to be rewarded with this beautiful scenery, and then the cloud was sitting. So I felt cheated on that day, but I will try it again when there's no cloud and overcast. Definitely enjoy hiking, whether it's a day hike or a hike with friends or colleagues, just to get out of the building, talk about something new, give you new experiences. Were those some of the things you did with your cohort members when you were in the MPA program?
Yeah, definitely. I discovered my now employer, very quickly upon moving. I was like, because, we'd driven out here and stopped in all these national parks, and my partner and I were like, we're going to hike and do stuff. So I was like, how do you find, and if you Google hikes in Washington, you'll end up on WTA's website. I'm happy to share the link in the chat. But search for all kinds of things, like where are there wildflowers blooming, where are there waterfalls. There's really like infinite recreation within the city itself. There are some, in my opinion, like world-class trails and hikes with beautiful views. But within an hour, within 2 hours, within 3 hours, you can feel like you are in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness. And realistically you are. So whatever your flavor of like getting outside or hiking, or even if you don't think of yourself as a hiker, but maybe like a nature walker, there's plenty to do. I actually got to do, it was the Evans School, the like spring raffle fundraiser. Somebody had donated a whitewater rafting trip that I got to come on, that one of the, Craig Thomas won, the professor, and he invited 2 students, and then they got to invite friends. And I was one of the friends that got invited. It was like the most fun I've ever had. So whitewater rafting, also an option, a fun option. But even, I feel like a lot of folks who live here enjoy outdoor activities. even those who don't enjoy outdoor activities enjoy the proximity of the vistas that those places provide. So the wonderful snow-capped mountains in the distance certainly aren't a bad backdrop to your photos.
Wonderful. And so if we just pull back just a little bit to your experience in the Evans MPA program,
Yeah.
what do you think you felt most valuable about that experience?
There are a couple of classes that I took, or like tools that I perfected at the Evans School, that I think about a lot. Ann Bostrom taught a class called the Ethics and Communication of Climate Change, which was straight up the hardest class I probably took at the Evans School, because it stretched my brain in such a way that like I just couldn't quite get there all the time. But I think about it constantly, both like at work and just in my personal life. So that one sticks with me. Then there's the memo, and figuring out how to write a good Evans School memo that still, 9 years later, I'm writing memos at work that nobody asked for a memo, but I write a memo because that's an effective way to communicate like a proposal or a change. And I get a lot of like compliments on how direct and efficient and concise and all that stuff. So while I'm not in, public policy, or I'm public policy adjacent, but I'm at a nonprofit organization, I'm not necessarily working with other MPAs all the time, but like the communication style is really valued. So that helped a lot. I think a lot about policy analysis and the use of a matrix for evaluation. I've used that in my personal life to evaluate housing options, to have my partner evaluate his job and whether or not he's still happy there. And then I use it at work constantly to evaluate different like approaches to a program problem or solution. And I think a lot about in my role, I think a lot about the management series. I manage people. I am also managed. I do managing up. I do managing sideways. I do managing down. I also was a TA in the management series my second year. So I feel like that curriculum in particular really locked in because I went through it twice, once as a student and once as a teacher. But in the end, like the thing that affects my day-to-day life from the Evans School the most is the community that I had. I mentioned this to Dr. Miller at the beginning, but maybe everyone didn't hear it. I'm currently 35 weeks pregnant. So if I sound like I'm out of breath, it's because my lungs are smaller than they normally are, and I am. And my baby shower was hosted by 3 of my best friends from the Evans School. So like, if that doesn't say something, like, I don't know what else does. Like, and even people who I wasn't necessarily friends with, or even people who like kind of annoyed me in class sometimes, like are still like, I love being connected to them on LinkedIn because I'm still excited to see what they're doing with their lives. Like, it's a pretty, compared to like my undergraduate, I still have great friends from undergrad, and they're great. But I don't sit there and think about their jobs that they hold and be like, wow, they're doing so much for the world and they're so cool. Like, because they're not. I mean, they're great. They're successful. They're having a good time. But the Evans community, I mean, there's just like it's like working at a nonprofit organization, frankly. Like, everyone has opted in because they're a certain level of values driven. And so while you may not like have everything in common, you're going to have one core thing in common, which is that, you've made a decision to like commit. One of your criteria for your career or vocation is impact. And that's really cool.
So if you look back over your journey, you had 9 years since graduation.
Yeah.
What will you tell yourself if you were just entering the program tomorrow? What advice would you give?
You know, well, I would advise myself to work in the first quarter. I was like, oh no, I haven't been to school in several years. I'm going to be like overwhelmed by classes. Like, I don't want to, but it, you never know how school is going to affect you again. Like, I had some friends in grad school who were super anxious about classes, and like it was really hard for them to make the transition back into being a student. It did not end up being that hard for me, and I regretted my financial situation at the end of the first quarter when I had not been working. I just like wanted to give myself that freedom. Uh, but ultimately, like I could have handled something. And so I think like assessing how much leeway you want to give yourself in terms of how you spend your time. But then like that winter, I went and got a part-time job at a nonprofit and did great work. But I also think there are great options to like do a job that's completely unrelated to your, interested field or something, like waiting tables or working at a coffee shop or at a bookstore or whatever, because that's another great way to meet people too outside of the program. Not that you clearly won't meet great people in the program, but it can be nice too to have a little bit of an anchor outside of classes and whatnot, because inevitably you'll talk a lot about school. And while that's great, I'll speak from experience bringing a partner into those conversations. They get really bored of it really fast, which is understandable. Because all these Evans School kids want to just talk about what they're learning and how exciting it is. So sometimes it can be great to have an anchor point outside. I think just like committing really thoroughly is something that I did and is advice that I would pass on, of being like, I'm here. I'm paying for it. I felt like I got so much more out of grad school than I did undergrad, both academically and personally, because I was a little bit older, because it felt more like a decision I had made than like a checkbox I was like following up on. But just like committing to absorbing as much as you can and doing what you can and being as attentive and engaged in class as possible. Like it's so easy. We're also easily distracted now. I feel grateful that I was just like really committed to being present within it, and like within joining the extracurricular options that were also offered. I think part of that came as being like new to the city and wanting to meet people. But I have come across people who I knew from class or whatever who didn't have as much fun or like didn't learn as much and weren't as engaged. And a lot of that is because they didn't like fully invest themselves and really just like commit to the time. So that's something I did that I would do again, and I would encourage other people to as well.
I can relate to that. When I went to grad school, I was looking at, okay, how quickly can I get through the process to get a degree, and didn't really take the time to enjoy the process or get to know my cohort members. It was just like I was focused, here's the goal, stick with it. And so when I talk to prospective students today or students coming in, I really encourage them, like you said, to take your time and enjoy the process, get to know the other students, get to know the faculty, interest groups that the Evans School has to offer. They come in that I think will find really valuable. I think listening to you, reading your book on all of these different places that you've gone to while you were in Washington. I moved to Washington in 2000, and I was just the A to B person. I wasn't venturing out, and now you're encouraging me to venture out a little more. And so I definitely use your book as a resource for some of the things we can do as a family on the outside.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you.
It's been a privilege to do. But I do want to give um, our students an opportunity to ask some questions. And Lily dropped in the Q&A, do you know anybody who moved to Washington to establish residency before enrolling in the Evans School?
Yes, Lily, great question. I do know a couple. And to be honest, if I had been willing to wait a couple of more years to go to grad school, I would have done something similar myself. Just it's definitely a financially pragmatic decision for folks. Several actually who did that. And I think that's a great option if you're like really sure that you want to live in Washington. I think Dr. Miller would be a better answer to the question of if that improves or not your potential admission rate. But I always joked like they were excited to have me. I was an out of state, student.
Well, I think it varies on the
Yeah.
person
Okay.
and where you're at in your career and what are you hoping to accomplish and what's your timeline. And so
Yeah.
I definitely want students to take a look at that. What is your admission offer? Was there a fellowship attached? If there's a fellowship, there is a time limit and expiration to it, and it's not transferable to defer a year. And so there's several different factors that go into that. It's like, oh, are you looking for a job, or do you want to take your first quarter and say, let me get the first quarter under my belt to see how I feel about working. But there are also some people who need to work. Instead of saying, let me get my feet under myself, they say, oh, I'm going to figure it out while I'm in my first quarter. And so we know that some students working is a required and not a kind of a luxury on doing. So I definitely work with students that time to look at what are their funding opportunities. And so we have several different opportunities for you to look at funding. I have a wonderful webinar that I do, Funding Your Evans School MPA. So we talk about the research that goes into that. But then there's some people who say, oh, I want to wait and hold on. And so we do have that. And so some students will come, and I encourage students that if they think they want to establish residency first, then that is definitely a conversation we need to have before you submit your application, because there's so many ramifications that happen after. And so you'll see that as we go through. But yes, we have students who have relocated and established their residency first. And then there are students who come that says, I'm all in. I want to immerse myself into this experience. And once I am in the Evans School, we're going to figure it out. And so we have career development advisors who help you if you say, oh, I need to work. What does working look like for the Evans School? And how do you make your schedule work so that you can be consistent in your part-time job that you will have? And so we definitely see students on both sides who want to establish residency or who want to immerse immediately. And so that is something we are always happy to have a conversation about. Great question. Thank you, Lily. Do we have any other questions? You're welcome to drop your questions in the chat box, or you're welcome to unmute yourself.
I'm going to go ahead and self-promote and drop a link to my book in the chat there in case anybody is curious.
Of course.
Oh, and I promised to send the hiking resource as well.
Yes. I got my book from Amazon.
I'm sharing yeah. Gotta I promote local bookstores in the book, so I have to
Exactly.
link to a
Well,
local
there you go.
bookstore.
Totally understand.
Kind of a professional courtesy, I think.
This might not have applied to. Are you?
Oh, let's see it.
Jonah?
You moved to Seattle with a partner, but I'm curious if you have tips to finding roommates prior to moving to Seattle. Great question. I did have a lot of friends who moved to Seattle, like, and did the roommate thing upon moving here. My impression is that a lot of that process ends up being often interview based, and like I guess now the world is different because of Zoom. So maybe you can like chat with prospective roommates over Zoom ahead of time. But I feel like if you're able to show up early in a way where like maybe your stuff kind of follows you, or you're willing to drive a U-Haul truck around for a couple of days, there's definitely like plenty of options for finding roommates through all the various sites and whatnot. I think, I'm not sure, does Evans still have like I feel like it was a Facebook group when I joined. That shows how long ago that was. But are there any like groups for admitted students where they can ask questions about roommate situations, Dr. Miller?
Yes, I believe that the admitted students have like, is it called Slack?
Oh yeah, sure.
They have a Slack account where they're always having those conversations, and then we can definitely share that out. For those who have already accepted their admission offer, there is a newly admitted student newsletter that's going out. I believe the first one goes out tomorrow. And so that gives you those tips. So there'll be something about Slack. There'll be something about Ask an Advisor. There'll be something for everyone. And so there is an opportunity for you to ask questions just like that. And then our academic advisors will respond to you with some resources. So great question. Yes. There's a question for you, Allie. While in the MPA program, were you part of a club or a student organization?
Yes, I was. Now I'm like, what did we call ourselves? But it was the nonprofit interest group. So folks who were interested in careers within nonprofit organizations. And I was the co-leader of that student organization in my second year. We would bring in leaders from various nonprofits in the area and have them talk to students. It was frankly a great excuse to do some networking on my own behalf through that organization. And then there were also several other student organizations who would like put on programming that I would attend. I've actually participated in several green Evans, so that's like the environmental interest group, like panels. Since then, they do like an alumni panel, and because of my role at WTA, I have been invited in the past. So yeah, would strongly encourage, dabbling in all. And even if you don't formally join or join a leadership group in any of them, they do, I ostensibly still put on great events because that's a fun way to meet people and get exposure, to other businesses and whatnot around Seattle.
And I dropped in the chat the link to the Evans SIGS group, which is a student interest group. So you can take a look at what are those interest groups. Green, the group is still in there. So there is definitely something for everyone. Or if you're interested in a different policy area, definitely I would encourage you to talk to your faculty to say, hey, how can I get connected in different kinds of ways?
One thing I wanted to add that sort of touches on the student interest group exposure. Well, there's one broader theme about Seattle, and then there's a like advice for time in Evans. And the broader theme is, you know, like them, love them, or hate them, Seattle is a hub of innovation when it comes to business. Between, you know, I can't even say Boeing without laughing now. Boeing used to be innovation. They were, you know, so like, there's a history there. But Microsoft and now Amazon and like a history of a really unique way of doing things. And I think that has trickled into all forms of government and the public sector here in Washington as well. King County, the county that Seattle is located in, from where I sit at like in public land management, is like ahead of the curve by light years away from like other land management agencies in terms of the way they think about equity, and the way they're measuring and tracking their work is really impressive and innovative. And I know they're innovating in other departments as well. It's just what I have the most exposure to. And then nonprofit organizations too, like doing really exciting, innovative stuff. So I think there's a real culture of innovation and intentionality in Seattle that's really exciting to tap into. So whether you're here for 2 years for the program, or you end up like me and it's 10 years, there's a lot of really exciting stuff to tap into. And that flows into my advice for treating your time as a student. I had somebody tell me that, and I wish I remembered who it was because this was killer advice, but I'll pass it on nonetheless, that in those 2 quarters before you graduate, you kind of become a job seeker, and you have a little bit more of a, this is a rude way to say it, but like, you've got a little bit of a smell on you. Like, they know that you want a job and that you're trying to figure that out. And that's not to say that people won't take random calls or meetings or coffee chats and networking and all that good stuff. But really, in your first year and a half is when you can totally maximize your, I'm a student and I'm just looking to learn, and involvement in those student groups. Like, I did a lot of that through the nonprofit organization. Like, we're hosting a panel, like, oh, and then it was so great to have you. Can I take you out to coffee to say thanks and also pick your brain about X, Y, and Z? And it's just like, being a student again is such a unique opportunity to get to talk to a lot of people without them feeling like, oh gosh, this person is going to like want something from me other than my like take and sort of hearing about what I do and the day to day. And I had a competition with one of my best friends who could do more informational interviews in that fall quarter of our second year. And I think I won. I mean, I don't actually know, but we both got jobs, so we both won. And actually, it was one of those random connections that I made that ended up playing a role in my landing a job at WTA. She was a corporate sponsor of the organization and brought me up to the hiring manager, which is like really nice. I mean, sometimes you need that, you need connections, and networking are like a fundamental part of doing business. And so just leaning in and enjoying that experience by getting to enjoy learning about how other people spend their time, making a difference, is pretty cool.
That is the exact same advice that I give.
Oh,
Everyone
good.
wants to help a student. So lean into, I'm a graduate student working and learning about, can I have like 5 or 10 minutes of your time to discuss X, Y, and Z?
Totally.
And everyone is always willing to help, especially over coffee in Seattle.
Yes.
But yes, that is great advice. It's the advice that I give students too. Step out of your comfort zone, get to meet other people, get to network, and always say thank you.
Yeah.
Time that they've sit with you, which is very valuable. Don't take their time for granted, but really appreciate it and let them know that you appreciate it. And so that networking is really important as you go through grad school and as you go through life. But as a grad student, people are always willing to share their expertise and experiences with you. So definitely take advantage of that. We are down to about 6 minutes. So are there any other questions we would like to ask Allie while we have her during this hour? I really appreciate her time and her willingness to share her expertise. I've learned a lot about you through this conversation and your book. Amazing. And I am trying some new things because of it. And I appreciate you so much. Do we have any final questions? Well, Allie, I want to thank you for spending this hour with us. We really appreciate you and enjoy you. Definitely take a look at her book. You will really enjoy it. You're welcome. And so definitely take your time to enjoy the book. Allie, if they would like to reach out to you, is there like a email address or a website?
LinkedIn is great. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn and we can go from there, I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. This concludes our webinar for this evening.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.